Shabbat Shalom Umevorach Shabbat Shalom Umevorach Shabbat Shalom Umevorach. ידיד נפש, הרחמן, משוך עבדך אל רצונך, ירוץ עבדך כמו רעיין, ישתחווה אל מול דרך ירב לו ידידותך מנופת צוף לכל טעם אדוני זיו העולם נפשי חולת אהבתך חנה אלה רפנה לה בהרותה נועם זיווה אז תתחזק ותתרפא והייתה לך שמחת עולם ותיק באמונה רחמך וחוסנה על בן אהובך כי זה כמה נחשפתי לראות בתפארת וזכר קנה אלי מחמדי וחוסנה ואל תתעלם יגלנה ופרוס חביב עליי את סוכת שלומך תהי ארץ מכבודך נהי לה ונשמחה בך מהרה הוא כי בא מועד זכור עינינו כי ימי עולם תילי לי 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 תילי לי 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 תילי לי 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 Tili lai 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 lai, tili lai 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 lai, tili lai 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 lai, tili lai 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 lai, tili lai 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 lai, tili lai 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 lai, tili lai 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 lai, tili lai 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 lai, tili lai 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 lai. Ha ha ha, tili lai lai. La la tili lai 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 tili lai 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 tili lai 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 tili lai 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 tili lai 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 tili lai 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 ha tili lai 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 tili lai 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 hai tili lai 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 tili lai 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 tili lai 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 tili lai 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 tili lai 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 tili lai 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 tili lai 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 לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת מקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת מקבלה. שמור וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד. השם אחד ושמו אחד, השם ותפארת ולתהילה. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת מקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת מקבלה. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה, כי היא מקור הברכה. בראש מקדם נסוכה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת מקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת מקבלה. מקדש מלך עיר מלוכה, קום יצאי מתוך ההפיכה. רב לך שבט בעמק הבכה, והוא יחמול עלייך חמלה. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת מקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת מקבלה. התנערי מעפר קומי, לבשי בגדי תפארתך עמי. על יד בן ישי בית הלחמי, קורבה נפשי גאלה. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת מקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת מקבלה. התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורך קומי אורי. אורי, אורי, שיר דברי, כבוד השם עלייך נגלה. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת מקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, לפני שבת נקרא בלה. שלום עליכם מלאכי השרת, מלאכי עליון, ממלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. שלום עליכם מלאכי השרת, מלאכי עליון, ממלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Let's get the Torah study started. Turn the music off. And this is Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im. We are in Parshat Vayechi, starting in Genesis chapter 47, verse 28. I have a little bit of a cold, so excuse me. I might seem a bit stuffed up. I hope I don't have the dreaded coronavirus that everyone is so fearful of. So what I'm going to do is what I've been doing in general lately, which is start by just reading the Parsha in Hebrew through. I'm going to start by reading the Parsha straight through in Hebrew, really without stopping at all, unless there's something specific that I want to say. And then later, after we read through, either later in this morning study, depending on the time, well, there should be time, or in this afternoon study, then we'll go back and analyze. Also, what I'd like to do, let me just change the screen sharing mode here. Stop screen. And share screen. Do window. This. Okay. So what I'd also like to do is go over, we were working on the spreadsheet last time. It mentions that 70 people went down with Yaakov, and we're trying to figure out, and it's a very careful count. In fact, there are subtotals throughout the count, but it's a bit confusing because when you tally it up, it's a bit difficult to see how it comes out to 70. So we've been going through this spreadsheet, which I actually did a number of years ago, but kind of, I guess, revising it or going over it again, auditing it, I guess you could say. So last week we went through the spreadsheet, and I'd like to continue going through it to see if we can identify exactly all 70 of the people that went down to Egypt with Yaakov. Okay? It should also be pointed out, there's a very specific tally there. Sometimes certain commentators will say that numbers like 7, 10, 70 are just around 400. It says that the Israelites will go down to Egypt for 400 years, but in the end, the tally is given for 430 years. So round numbers such as this, especially the numbers 7, 10, 70, are often thought of as meaning kind of a, how could you say, general number, like lots. It's not meant to be specific, but we do have specific counts along the way. So there's certain places, for instance, here, where is it? Yeah, we're given a count, such as 16 in all, and there are a couple of other places. We'll see it when we go through. So I would like to get a handle on that, because it's not so 100% clear what's going on. Another odd thing, I guess you could say, is that they're out of all the descendants of Yaakov, according to the list that's given, there are only 2 women. There's Dinah. I marked the women in pink. There's Dinah. There's Leah herself. Leah is not yet Leah is still alive. Rachel's died already, but a long time ago. But Leah is still alive. So there's Leah, and then there's a daughter of Asher named Serah. And those are the only 3 women mentioned at all. And yet it speaks about Yaakov going down with all his daughters and his son's daughters. So something's a little bit strange with the count, but we'll tackle that later. In the meantime, what we're going to do is just read through this week's Parsha. So that's in the end of last week's Parsha. And so we're going to read through now this week's Parsha, just in Hebrew, even though I'm a bit stuffed up. In fact, I should. I'll manage. And we're going to start in, well, it's officially Genesis 47:28. I'll start in verse 27. And so what happened last is that so Yosef is in charge in Egypt, and so Jacob came down and settled in Goshen, and then it speaks about Yosef in charge in Egypt and some of the things he did, some of the financial programs that he enacted, shall we say, and now Jacob and the rest of his family have come down to Egypt. So we pick it up in Genesis chapter 47, verse 27. And again, I'm just going to be reading in Hebrew. You could follow along. Let me just make sure that the screen is set up correctly. Yes, it is. Okay. And I'll call out the chapter and verse every so often. Okay. So, Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen v'yahazu ba v'yifru v'yirbu me'od Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim Sheva Esrei Shana Vayehi Yemei Yaakov Shnei Hayav Sheva Shanim Va'arba'im Ma'at Shana 147 years. Verse 29. Vayikrevu Yemei Yisrael Lamut Vayikra Livno Yosef ויאמר לו אם נא מצאתי חן בעיניך שים נא ידך תחת ירכי ועשית עמדי חסד ואמת אל נא תקברני במצרים ושכבתי עם אבותיי ונישאתני ממצרים וקברתני בקבורתם ויאמר אנוכי אעשה כדבריך. Verse 31. ויאמר יישבע לי וישבע לו וישתחו ישראל על ראש המיטה. Chapter 48. And we're going up to, by the way, chapter 50. 26. So we're in chapter 48, verse 1. ויהי אחרי הדברים האלה, ויאמר ליוסף, הנה אביך חולה, ויקח את שני בניו עמו, את מנשה ואת אפרים. ויגד ליעקב, ויאמר, הנה בנך יוסף בא אליך, ויתחזק ישראל, וישב על המיטה. ויאמר יעקב אל יוסף, אל שדי נראה Elai beluz be'eretz Kina'an o yivarech oti. That's his referring now when he says that that El Shaddai appeared to him in Luz. Luz is Bethel. This is where he had his first vision when he left his father's house. Man, so many years ago. This was the vision where he had basically the Jacob's ladder vision. Verse 4. Vayomer Elai hineni mafrecha v'hirbiticha v'nitaticha lekahal ramim v'natati et haaretz hazot לזרחה אחריה אחוזת עולם ואתה שני בניך הנולדים לך בארץ מצרים עד בואי אליך מצרימה לי הם אפרים ומנשה כראובן ושמעון יהיו לי. verse 6 ומולדתך אשר הולדת אחריהם, לך יהיו על שם אחיהם יקראו בנחלתם. ואני בבואי מפדם מתה עלי רחל בארץ כנען, בדרך בעוד כברת ארץ לבוא אפרתה, ואקברה שם בדרך אפרת he Beit Lachem. So we know that Efrat is Beit Lachem from here. Yar Yisrael et Bnei Yosef. Yomer mi ele. Yomer Yosef el, and by the way in verse 9 now. Yomer Yosef el Aviv. Banai hem asher natan li Elohim bazeh. Yomer kahem na elai. ועברכם בעיני ישראל כבדו מזוקן לא יוכל לראות ויגש אותם אליו וישק להם ויחבק להם. ויאמר ישראל אל יוסף ראו פניך לא פיללתי והנה הראה אותי אלוהים גם את זרעך. ויצא יוסף אותם מעם ברחב וישתחו לאפיו ארצה. ויקח יוסף את שניהם את אפרים בימינו ומשמאלו ישראל. ואפרים בימינו משמאלו ישראל ואת מנשה בשמאלו מימין ישראל, והגש אליו, וישלח ישראל את ימינו, ושת על ראש אפרים, והוא הצעיר, ואת שמאלו על ראש מנשה, סיכל את ידו, כי מנשה בחור. Verse 15, ויברך את יוסף. Just a very quick point here. We have this theme that occurs again and again of the reversing of the Bechorah, of the firstborn, right? Yaakov came out after Esav, but Yaakov ended up being the firstborn. Reuven and Shimon, as we'll see later in the blessing, or Reuven especially, is basically his Bechorah, his firstborn status is taken away. And essentially, Yosef becomes the firstborn. He gets the double portion. That's exactly what's going on here by elevating his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, to the level of his own sons, his tribes. He's basically essentially giving Joseph double portion, which is reserved for the firstborn. In a sense, Yosef was the firstborn because he was the firstborn of Rachel, who was, we could say, Yaakov's real wife, the only wife that Yaakov wanted. Okay. We were in verse 15. ויברך את יוסף. ויאמר האלוהים אשר הבטחו אבותיי לפניו, אברהם ויצחק, האלוהים הרואה אותי מעודי עד היום הזה, המלאך הגואל אותי מכל רע, יברך את הנערים ויקרא בהם שמי, ושם אבותיי אברהם ויצחק, וידגו לרוב בקרב הארץ. It's become a famous song. Verse 17, וירא יוסף כי ישית אביו יד ימינו על ראש אפרים, וירא בעיניו, ויתמוך יד אביו להסיר אותה מעל ראש אפרים על ראש מנשה. ויאמר יוסף אל אביו, לא כן אבי, כי זה הבכור, שים ימינך על ראשו. וימאן אביו, יאמר ידעתי בני, ידעתי, גם הוא יהיה לעם, וגם הוא יגדל, ואולם אחיו הקטון יגדל ממנו, וזרעו יהיה מלוא הגויים. Notice this is saying that each one who yet la'am, each one will be a people or a nation, which implies that, and he's one of the tribes of Israel. This implies that when Abraham is given the blessing that he will be a av l'hamon goyim, it doesn't necessarily. It really means, it might mean just the blessing of the 12 tribes, because each tribe is referred to as an People understand that as meaning that he will be, well, he did. His other sons, specifically Ishmael, also became a large nation. But the blessing itself might be referring specifically to the 12 tribes of Israel, since the tribe here is called an Am. And everything really in the Tanakh is on the Torah is focused ultimately on Israel, not on the other seed, the cousins. It's not focused on Esav, it's not focused on Ishmael, it's focused on Israel, on Israel. Okay, we are in Genesis chapter 8, verse 20. ויברכם ביום ההוא לאמור, לך יברך ישראל, לאמור, ישימך אלוהים כאפרים וכמנשה, וישם את אפרים לפני מנשה. יאמר ישראל אל יוסף, הנה אנוכי מת, וחיה אלוהים עמכם, ושיב אתכם אל ארץ אבותיכם. ואני נתתי לך שכם אחד על אחיך, אשר לקחתי מיד האמורי בחרבי ובקשתי. So here, we've spoken about this a number of parshas ago. I can't remember in exactly what context, but here, Yaakov seems to be giving Joseph the city of Shechem, which he says he took from the Amorites with his sword and his bow. Is that really so? Did he really take Shechem from the Amorites with a sword and his bow? No. What happened is that we know the story that this is a story regarding Dinah, that Shimon and Levi came in and slaughtered the entire town, and then Yaakov was kind of upset about it. So what's going on here? We'll talk a bit more about that later. Okay, we're now up to chapter 49. ויקרא יעקב אל בניו, ויאמר, האספו, ואגיד עליכם את אשר יקרא אתכם באחרית הימים. הקבצו, ושימו בני יעקב, ושימו אל ישראל אביכם. And here we go, the blessings for the 12 children. ראובן בכורי אתה, כוחי וראשית עוני, יתר שאת ויתר עוז. פחז כמים, אל תותר, כי עלית משכבי אביך, אז חילת יצועי עלה. יצועי עלה. Verse 5. שמעון ולוי, אחים, כלי חמאס מכורותיהם. בסודם אל תבוא נפשי, בקהלם אל תחד כבודי, כי באפם הרגו איש, וברצונם עקרו שור. ארור אפם כי עז, ועברתם כי קשתה, אכלכם ביעקב, ואפיצם בישראל. יהודה, אתה, יודוך אחיך, ידך בעורף, אויביך, ישתחו לך בני אביך. It's interesting that Yaakov is now having it's not a dream, but it's a blessing, where he says, Yishtachu lecha b'nei avicha, the sons of your father, meaning your brothers, will bow down before you. Well, it's interesting because Yosef had the dream that his brothers would bow down before him. But now Yaakov is giving this blessing, shall we say, to Yehuda. And this is fulfilled, it would seem, when the line of David, who's from the tribe of Yehuda, is chosen as the eternal dynasty over Israel. Okay. Verse 9. Gur Aryeh Yehuda, miteref beni alita, kara ravatz ke'aryeh, ukelavi mi yakimenu. Lo יסור שבט מיהודה ומחוקק מבין רגליו עד כי יבוא שילה ולא יגחת עמים. So לא יסור שבט מיהודה shall not be taken away or shall not be removed from Yehuda. The staff is a symbol of always refers to authority or sovereignty. No, sovereignty is not the right word. We should say authority. Mechokek mi ben raglav, and one who makes laws from between his legs. In other words, his descendants will always be the lawmakers, the rulers. Ad ki yavo Shiloh, until Shiloh comes. Well, what's Shiloh? That's a big question, which we're not really. There are a lot of different opinions on that, and we'll talk about that later also. Verse 11. Osri legefen, hiro, uresreka bini, atono, kibes bayayin, levusho, wadam anavim, sto. Achlili, einayim miyayin, u leven shinayim mehalav. So very poetic Hebrew. His eyes are redder than wine. Achlili is not a very commonly used word, or darker. I should say darker. Uleven shinayim mehalav, and the whiteness of his uliben shinayim mehalav, and the whiteness of his teeth or his teeth are whiter than milk. Again, this is all speaking about Yehuda. So Yehuda is getting a pretty long blessing here. So far, he has the longest blessing. Zvulun lehof yamim ishkon, hu lehof aniyot, vayarkuto al Sidon. So Zvulun is going to be dwelling along the seacoast, and his borders will be until Sidon. So we have these are the two of the one of the famous cities in Lebanon, right? There's Sidon, and I'm having a mental block. What's the other one? Sor, right? Higher, right? In Hebrew, it's Sor, yeah. Okay, Sor, it's Sidon. So these are two of the famous cities up in the Lebanon. So his border will extend up to Sidon. Now, Sidon, you can actually see the outskirts of Tzidon. I believe, one second here. Oh, we'll do this later. Okay. I believe it's Sidon. You can see the outskirts from the northern border of Israel. When you're up by Rosh Nikra, which I was a couple of years ago, and you look north, you can actually see basically the outskirts of Sidon. Okay, verse 14. Issachar Hamor Garem Rovetz Ben Hamishpatim Oyar Minuha Kitov Wet Haaretz Ki Ne'ema Wayet Shichmo Lisbon Wahi Lemas Roved Dan Yadin Amo Yahad Shiftei Israel Yehi Dan Nahash Ale Derech Shififon Ale Orach Hanoshech Rechvei Sus Uyipol Rochvo Ahor Leishuatcha Kiviti Yehovah Gad Gedud Igudenu Wahu Yagud Akev Measher Shmena Lahmo Wahu Yitain Ma'adane Melech Naftali Ayala Shlucha Hanotain Imre Shafer. And here's the blessing of Yosef. It's a long one, very poetic, very hard to understand. A lot of words that are not used commonly in the Tanakh, and a lot of the translation, quite frankly, even by many expert translators, is to a certain degree speculation. At any rate, Ben Porat Yosef, Ben Porat, Ale Ayin, Banot, Tza'ada, Ale Shor, Wa Yimararuhu, Wa Arobu, Wa Yisdamuhu, Ba'ale Haitzim, Wa Teshev Be'etan Kashto, Wa Yafozu, Zor'e Yadaw, Midei Avir, Yaakov, Misham Ro'e, Even Israel, Me'el Avicha, Yazarecha, Wa'et Shaddai, Uyevarechecha, Birkot Shamayim, Me'al Birkot Tahom, Rovetzet, Tahat, Birkot Shaddayim, We'rachem. It's very interesting. Yivarechecha Birkot Shamayim Me'al. May he bless you with the blessings of the heavens above. Birkot Tahom Rovetzet Tahat. And the blessings of the Tahom, this is usually translated as the abyss or the deep waters, Rovetzet Tahat, that lies below. Well, this almost goes back to Genesis chapter 1, where it speaks about the Tahom, where it speaks about the deep abyss below. And again, we'll talk about that when we hopefully we'll get up to this. But it's just very interesting that this is referred to, the Shemayim above and the Tahom Rovetz Tachat. Birkot Shaddayim Warachem. Birkot Avicha Gavru Al Birkot Horai. Ad Ta'avat Givot Olam. Tiena Rosh Yosef Ulekot Kod Nazir Techav. Binyamin Zev Yitraf. Babokir Yochal Ad Wal Erev Yahalek Shalal. Binyamin Ze'ev. This is why a lot of times people are named Binyamin Ze'ev. Kol Ela Shiftei Israel. Shneim Asar Wazot Asher Diber Lahem Avihem. Uyevarech Otam Ish Asher Kibirkato Berach Otam. So these are the 12 tribes of Israel. Yosef is considered one tribe here in this count of the 12 tribes, shall we say. We have all of the 12 sons of Jacob included, including Shimon and Levi. When Israel is, shall we say, becomes a nation later on, based on what we saw in the previous chapter, Ephraim and Manasseh are elevated to tribes. So, in a sense, there are 13 tribes because Yosef becomes Ephraim and Manasseh. But then Levi is scattered among all of Israel. So that's almost like one tribe less. So it, depending on the context, when you're speaking about the 12 tribes, it could be these 12 sons of Jacob, or it could be Ephraim and Manasseh are counted as two tribes, and then Levi is not counted as a tribe because they don't own any land within the inheritance of the land of Israel. Okay. So we are now in Genesis chapter 49, verse 29. ויצב אותם, ויאמר עליהם, אני נאסף אל עמי, קברו אותי, אל אבותיי, אל המערה אשר בשדה עפרון החיתי, במערה אשר בשדה המכפלה. And by the way, notice that the cave is not called Machpelah. The region there, or the area there, is called Machpelah. This is a mistake that a lot of people make. So it says, Ba'ma'ara asher b'sadeh ha-machpelah, the cave, which is in the field of the Machpelah. The Machpelah was an area. So there was a field in the area known as Machpelah, and in that field was a cave, and that was owned by Ephron the Hittite. And that's what Abraham purchased from him. We saw that a number of parshiyot ago. Asher al pnei mamre be'eretz Canaan asher kana Avraham et hasadeh me'et Ephron haiti be'achazat kaver. Sham kavru et Avraham wa'et Sarah ishto. Sham kavru et Yitzhak wa'et Rivka ishto. Shama kavarti et Leah. Well, this is a new interesting piece of information because up until now, we didn't even know that Leah had died, right? Miknei hasadeh uhama. Well, let's see. Didn't mention anything about Leah's death. I don't think so. And in fact, when I was doing my count, I counted Leah as one of the people that is potentially counted in the 70 people that came down. Now, if I'm not mistaken, well, we'll do this more when we go back and analyze. But let me just look very quickly for my own curiosity. We'll go here. So it's all pretty much in order here. This all Lavan. Okay, let's do it this way. Is this going in order? I hope so. 32, 30. 1 second here. Collected Leah. Since 35. Leah Asher Yalda, sons of Leah. Zilpa, Shifchan Leah. Ela b'nei Leah Asher Yalda. Tan Lavan Leah, yeah, it's 46. Kavati et Leah. So this is the first time, unless I'm missing something, b'nei Leah, Bechor Yaakov, Dina bat Leah, Gashkam Leah v'yaledeha v'yishtachu. So that's when they're coming back from Egypt. That's before Rachel dies. I'm from Padan Aram. That's before Rachel dies. So yeah, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first mention ever that Leah died. Okay, the previous mention of Leah before this is in Genesis 46. Just look at very quickly. These were sons of Leah whom she bore to Jacob. And so this is the count of the 70 people going down to Egypt, which includes Leah, which seems to include Leah. And before that mention, then we go all the way back to Genesis 35. Look at this for a second. No. Benjamin is born, Rachel dies. Oops, where was that again? 26. Right. Sons of Jacob, so that's just a kind of summary right before Isaac dies of Jacob's sons, and Leah, there's no indication there that Leah has died. So yeah, this is the first mention we have here that Leah died. It's not mentioned when she died, but she had already, by this point, had already been buried in the Ma'ara Asher B'Sadeh HaMachpelah, the cave which is in the field of the Machpelah. Okay. Shama kavru et Avraham ואת שרה אשתו, shama kavru et יצחק ואת רבקה אשתו, ושמה קברתי את Leah. There I buried Leah. So Leah is already gone. She's already dead by this point. Verse 32. ומקנה השדה והמערה אשר בו מאת בני חית. ויכל יעקב לצוות את בניו ויסוף רגליו אל המיטה ויגבע ויאסף אל עמו. He was gathered to his people. Now, I would claim there's a lot of talk about whether the Torah believes in afterlife or speaks of an afterlife or not. I would claim that this phrase here, وَإِسَفْ el amal, that he was gathered to his people, would imply very clearly that although the Torah really never focuses on the afterlife, that the underlying theology, or shall we say the spiritual cosmology of the Torah does include a belief in the afterlife. And this verse proves it. I've written an article on that, if I can find it for a second. I'll post a link to it for those who are interested. One second. Here we go. Let me just post this. So, if you want to find out more about my opinion of what the Torah says, or the Torah's spiritual cosmology regarding an afterlife, you can take a look at that article. Okay. At any rate, now so it's immediately mentioned that Leah died, and now Yaakov dies. Vichal Yaakov letzavot, banav Yosef al raglav el hamita, igva Yosef el amav. verse 50. ויפול יוסף על פני אביו, ויבך עליו, וישק לו. וצב יוסף את עבדיו, את הרופאים, לחנות את אביו, ויחנתו הרופאים את ישראל. verse 3. וימלאו לו 40 יום, כי כן ימלאו ימי החנותים, ויבכו אותו מצרים 70 יום. ויעברו ימי בחיתו, ידבר יוסף אל בית פרעה, לאמור אם נא מצאתי חן בעיניכם, דברו נא באזני פרעה לאמור, אבי השביעני לאמור הנה אנוכי מת, מקברי אשר קריתי לי בארץ כנען, שמה תקברני, ועתה אעלה נא ואקברה את אבי ואשובה. ויאמר פרעה, עלה קבור את אביך כאשר השביעך. So it's interesting that Yosef is now asking Pharaoh to leave, and he promises, and I will come back. He promises to come back. Right? I wouldn't say this is foreshadowing, but it's an interesting coincidence that 430 years later, the Israelites want to leave, and they say, oh, we'll just go out into the desert for a 3-day festival, and then we'll come back. The Pharaoh then is very afraid that the Israelites are going to leave and not come back. At that point, he's afraid. Later on, Pharaoh is afraid because they're slaves, right? He needs their slave labor, or it's mentioned he's afraid they're gonna leave and then team up with the enemies of Egypt and help start a war against Egypt. So the Pharaoh of Moses' generation is afraid that the Israelites are going to leave for those reasons. And here, this Pharaoh, it would imply, is afraid that Joseph is going to leave and not come back. He's also relying on Joseph, although Joseph is number 2 here. He's the leader of Egypt behind Pharaoh, but in a certain sense, he's kind of a slave to Pharaoh. He's needed. His slave labor in running the whole thing is kind of needed by Pharaoh, and I guess Pharaoh would be afraid that he would just go up to the land of Canaan and not come back. So Yosef, like the Israelites later on, have to promise that they'll come back after 3 days. Of course, when Moses says we're going to come back after 3 days, he's just kind of playing with Pharaoh's mind. When we get into the book of Exodus and the whole story of Exodus, we'll get to that. The whole thing is really just a giant mind game on Pharaoh and the Egyptians. It's a whole bunch of psychological warfare, I would call it, on the Egyptians, playing with their minds until God, Moses playing with Pharaoh's mind, or God playing with Pharaoh's mind through Moses, until finally we see who the better chess player is. Verse 6, Wayomer Paro, and we also see in the character of that Pharaoh of the generation of Egypt, a leader who has such a power and control and is considered a god. We know the Egyptian pharaohs were considered gods by themselves and by their own people. How he just completely collapses. It's just all illusion, like any idol, right? There's no real power behind it. It's all illusion. And when God applies his chess game to Pharaoh, he can hold up the illusion for a while, but eventually just collapses and crumbles like the idol that he is. Okay, verse 6, Vayomer Paro, Ale, Gvor et avicha kasher hishbi'echa. So this time Pharaoh agrees. He is trusting in Joseph. It's a trusting relationship, obviously. He's trusting Yosef with with his entire kingdom. He realizes probably that Yosef is more competent than he is. He can't do it himself. He needs Yosef. Verse 7, Ya'al Yosef likbor et aviv, ya'alu ito Kol avdei Pharaoh, ziknei beto, v'chol ziknei eretz Mitzrayim. Well, maybe, how do we say? Trust yet verify, trust yet verify. Um, yes, he trusts Yosef. He's sending all of his servants and all of the elders of his house and all the elders of the land of Egypt. So I guess he doesn't completely trust him. Although obviously the context here is really they're setting him up as a kind of an honor god to accompany Yosef and the body of his father to bury him. Okay, that was kind of a joke that he doesn't trust him, but maybe there's a certain element to that. Maybe that's one of the reasons he decided to send this huge entourage, is to make sure Yosef comes back. Although it certainly, we can't really glean that from the text. Okay, verse 8. L'chol beit Yosef ve'echav ve'beit aviv rak tapam u'tzonam b'karam azvu be'eretz Goshen. Verse 9. Ya'al imo kol gam rechev gam parashim v'hi mahane kaved me'od ויבוא עד גורן האטד אשר מעבר הירדן ויסבדו שם מסבד גדול וכבד מאוד יעש לאביו אבל 7 ימים. So I think this is where the Rabbinites get the idea of the sitting Shiva, except it doesn't make sense because this is already, well, let's see. There was a 70-day Yamalulo 40 Yom, Tzeviot Avadav Ephraim, Yachnot et Aviv, Yachnot Erofim et Yisrael, Yamalu. He embalmed him for 40 days, and they mourned him for 70 days. I would think the context there is concurrent with the embalming. So a total of 70 days before they even head up to bury him. So if this is the basis that the Rabbinites, which I believe they do, want to use this verse to get their idea of sitting Shiva, which is a very good tradition. I'm not saying anything against it, but if they want to claim it's directly from the Torah, they would have a lot of problems here, because this Shiva takes place, well, after the 70 days are over. Then Yosef asks Pharaoh to go back up to the land of Canaan, and then they get the whole entourage together and they head out, and that's got to take at least a couple of days. So we're talking about maybe 3 months after Yaakov dies. In this case, that's when Yosef does the 7 days of mourning for his father. Yar Yoshev Haaretz Hekinani et Ha'evel Bigoren Ha'atad Yomru Evel Kaved Zeh LeMitzrayim Arken Kara Shema Avel Mitzrayim Asher Be'ever HaYarden. So there's this place called Goren Ha'atad, the threshing floor of is that a proper name, or does that mean like a proper name? Yeah, the threshing floor of Atad, which is on the other side, which is on the eastern side of the Jordan, and that became known as Evel Mitzrayim. Well, I'm curious if they have any idea where this place exactly is, or if it's ever mentioned again. Let me see if it's mentioned again. Judges 9:15. Atad ela eitzim. Okay. What's that? So this place, I don't think is ever mentioned again, but we'll look it up. Goren Atad. Okay. So this would be Atad, would mean then bramble, I guess. Threshing floor of bramble. All right, we'll get to that when we get to the analysis. Yomru evel kaved zeh leMitzrayim. Arken kara shema avel Mitzrayim asher be'ever hayarden. Ever hayarden always means eastern side of the Jordan River. Verse 12. יעשו בניו לו כן כאשר ציוום, וישאו אותו בניו ארצה כנען, ויקברו אותו במערת שדה המכפלה אשר קנה אברהם את השדה לאחוזת קבר מאת עפרון החיתי על פני ממרא. And it's mentioned again, it's now the second time in this parsha alone that it's mentioned that Abraham bought this parcel of land with the cave in it. וישב יוסף מצרימה הוא ואחיו וכל העולים איתו לקבור את אביו אחרי קברו את אביו. So now he returns with all his brothers. Verse 15. ויראו אחי יוסף כי מת אביהם ויאמרו לו יסתמנו יוסף ואשב ישיב לנו את כל הרעה אשר גמלנו אותו. So now the brothers are afraid after Yaakov has died, after the father has died, that Yosef is going to take revenge on them, that he was just holding back so as not to hurt his father. Sadly, I guess it's a common thing in many families when the when the parents died and the surviving siblings start to bicker, whether it's over money or land or all kinds of things. So I guess the siblings here are worried that might be the case here. Verse 16. ויצאו אל יוסף לאמור, אביך ציווה לפני מותו לאמור, כה תאמרו ליוסף, אנא שא נא פשע אחיך וחטאתם, כי רעה גמלוך ואתה שנא לפשע עבדי אלוהי אביך. ויפח יוסף בדברם אליו. Verse 18. וילכו גם אחיו ויפלו לפניו ויאמרו, הננו לך לעבדים. ויאמר עליהם יוסף, אל תיראו, כי התחת אלוהים אני, אתם השבתם עלי רעה. אלוהים השווה לטובה, למען עשה כיום הזה לחיות עם רב. ועתה אל תיראו, אנוכי אקלקל אתכם ואת טפכם, וינחם אותם וידבר על ליבם. Oh, did we go too far? No, we didn't. We went to the end. Right. So we go straight to the end of Genesis. וישב יוסף במצרים, הוא ובית אביו, ויחי יוסף 110 שנים, יער יוסף לאפרים בני שלישים, גם בני מכיר בן מנשה, יולדו על ברכי יוסף. יאמר יוסף אל אחיו, אנוכי מת, ואלוהים פקוד יפקוד אתכם, והעלה אתכם מן הארץ הזאת. אל הארץ אשר נשבע לאברהם, ליצחק וליעקב. וישבע יוסף את בני ישראל לאמור, פקוד יפקוד אלוהים אתכם, והעליתם את עצמותי מזה. וימת יוסף בן 110 שנים, ויחנתו אותו, וישם בארון במצרים. So that's the end of the Parsha. That's the end of the book of Genesis. Next time, we'll be starting the book of Exodus. Just one second. I'm not going to go into the book of Exodus now. I'm just looking at something. Yep. So now we switch after that to the generation of Moses. Okay, so let me take this comment down. Okay, so now we can go over and start analyzing a little bit. There's a lot to say about this parsha, that's for sure. So let me take a break for 5 minutes, and I'll put up a bit of music, and then we will start with some analysis. We'll go back to Genesis 47:28. That's where we were. Great.
מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא בואכם לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון מי מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא בואכם לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון מי מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא בואכם לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון מי מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ברכוני לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון מי מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ברכוני לשלום מלאכי השלום עליון ברכוני לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון מי מלך מלכי המלכים צאתכם לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון מי מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא צאתכם לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון מי מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא צאתכם לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון מי מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. אשת חיל ימצא ורחוק מפנינים ממך, פתח בלבלה ושלל לא יחסר. מלאתו טוב ולא רע כל ימי חייך, תרשע מרופשתי ותעש בחפץ לבנה. הייתה כאוניו סוחר ממרחק תביא לך, ותקום בעוד לילה ותיתן טרף לביתה בחוף מנהרותיה, שמה שדה ותיקחהו מפרי כפיה נתכרם, הגרה בעוז מותניה ותאמץ זרועותיה. כמה כיתות שכר לא יכבה בלילה נר, ידיה שילחה בקישו וכפיה תמכו חלב. כפה פרסה לעני וידיה שילחה ללוי, מצהירה לבית המשענת כי כל בית לבוש אני. מרבדים עשתה לה שש דרגמן לבושה, נודע בשערים בעלה בשבטו עם זקני ארץ, סדים עשתה ותמכור וחדור נתנה לכנעני, עוז והדר לבושה ותשחק ליום אחרון. פיה פתחה בחוכמה ותורת חסד על לשון, צופיה הליכות ביתה ולחי מצלות לא תופר. קמו בניה וישבוה בעלה ויהלו ברמות בנות עשו חיי והטלית על כולנה שקר אחר והבל היופי, אישה יראת השם התפללתנו לה מפרי ידיה והללוה בשערים נעשיה. מנוחה ושמחה אוהל היהודים, יום שבתון יום אחמדים, שומרה וזוכרה המה מעידים, כי לשישה כל ברואים ועומדים. שמי שמיים ארץ וימים, כל צבא מרום גויים ורעים, תנין ואדם בחיית רמי כי ביה השם צור עולמים הוא אשר דיבר לעם סגולתו שמור לקדשו מבואו ועצתו שבת קודש יום חנדתו כי בו שבת מכל מלאכתו שמי שמיים ארץ ימים כל צמרות גויים ורמים תנין ואדם בחיית רמי כי ביה השם צור עולמים ומצוות שבת אליה חליצה קום קרא אליו יחיש לארצה נשמע.
Okay, so we're back. Welcome back to the study. This is Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im. And now we'll go back to the beginning of the Parsha and we'll try to get a bit more into it. We'll get in some details. Oops. It disappeared. There we go. I'm back. We'll try to get some more details and we'll just analyze and see where things go. If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to add them. Any particular topics you want to discuss or focus on, please let me know. And that's it. Let's get going. Let me make sure my setup is correct. No, got to change this. 1 second here. There we go. That should do it. So this way, when I switch from tab to tab, then you can see the tabs that I'm on. So if I'm looking at the Torah or I'm looking at the spreadsheet or whatever the case may be. Okay, so we are starting in chapter 47, verse 28. We'll start at 27, and it says, וישב ישראל בארץ מצרים, בארץ גושן, ויחזו בה, ויפרו וירבו מאוד. So they stayed in the land of Goshen. The land of Goshen is towards the north east of Egypt, I guess you could say. And it's basically easy, kind of a great place to be if you want to escape to Canaan. So, all right, verse 28. Wahi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim Shiva Esrei Shana. So Yaakov was in the land of Egypt for 17 years. It has been pointed out that this is the same age that Joseph was when he was taken away, when he was sold. So there are a lot of parallelisms in the Torah in general. So 17 years. It's not the first time this time span of 17 years appears, right? Joseph was 17 years old when he was sold. I'm not going to read into it more than that, but I'm just pointing it out. Okay. Yaakov, Shnei Hayav, Sheva Shanim v'Arba'im u'ma'at Shana. And then so Yaakov lived until Sheva Shanim v'Arba'im u'ma'at Shana, 147 years. So if he was in Egypt for 17 years, that means he came down to Egypt when he was 130 years old. right? And I guess we could sit. A lot of people have done, tried to put timelines together and lengths of people's lives who that are not mentioned explicitly in the Torah, like Leah's. I don't know if you could work it out from the different events, but we're not going to do that here. We're going to move on. Vayikaravu Yemei Yisrael Lamut, and the days of Yikaravu Yemei Yisrael Lamut literally came close or approached. In other words, Israel was getting ready. It was clear he was going to die. Vayikra livno leYosef, and he called to his son Yosef. Vayomer lo imna matzati chayin ba'einecha, and he said to him, if I have found pleasure in your eyes, right? So this is kind of a very subservient way for Yaakov to speak to Yosef. He says to Yosef, if I've found pleasure in your eyes, it's not a way that a father should have to speak to a son, right? The father shouldn't have to say to the son, if you like me, son, then do such and such. But this was just a formal way of speaking. This is the way people spoke to each other when they had a request. It would almost be like saying, if a father says to a son, "Do me a favor, son, and I don't know, get me potato chips from the 7-Eleven," or whatever the case may be, right? Do me a favor, son, and right? So that this is a formalized way of saying it. So if I have found favor in your eyes, Yaakov says to Joseph, but that's just formulaic. That's the way people spoke. That was what was said before they had a request. And Yaakov indeed does have a request. Simna yadcha tachad yerechi. Place your hand under my thigh, literally. Okay, and there could be a lot of we've seen this a bunch of times in the Torah, right? Place your hand under my thigh. I'm trying to think what other places offhand. Well, let's look it up. So in Genesis 24, so this is before he speaks to the eldest servants of his house, which I think, even though it's not mentioned explicitly, I think we can assume this is Eliezer. Avraham el avado zaken beito hamosher b'chol asher lo simna yadcha tachat yerechi. This is where Avraham is going to ask him to go find a wife for his son Yitzchak. Bashbiacha b'Yehovah Elohei Hashemayim Elohei haaretz asher lo tikach isha livni livnot kenani asher anochi yoshev b'kirbo ki el artzi ve'el moledati. Okay, so Avraham requests from, I'm going to assume it's Eliezer, so I'll just say Eliezer, to simna yadcha tachad yerechi, place your hand under my thigh, or on my thigh, and I will make you take an oath. I will swear you in, saying, or I will make you swear, saying, etc., etc. Okay, so we see this phrase a number of times. It's a common way to basically solidify an oath. Now, it does say under my thigh, but there is an opinion that that this is a euphemism for the private parts. So really, it's possible that that what Yaakov is requesting here is for Yosef to put his hands on or very close to his private parts, because the private parts, if you take an oath on the private parts, it's like a solemn, sacred oath for, I guess, reasons one could figure out. It's it's like I don't want to get disgusting or too colloquial, but I'm curious again. I always go to my boy Robert Abrams. I'm curious what he thinks about that as well. He might not mention it here because it's not the first time it's mentioned. Let's see here. He doesn't mention it here, but I'm curious if he mentions it back in, where was that? Genesis 24. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold. So that was Genesis 24, 2. So let's take a look here. Genesis 24. Unfortunately, it's very hard to get around this thing, but we'll take a shot at it. So 356. We'll take a chance of around 299. Oh, we gotta go way back. Four. Put your hands on my thigh. Here it is. Okay, let's see if there's a footnote on it. Nope, there's not here either. And I'm not gonna go search it down. Where was it? That was 24. 1 second. Am I in the right place? Here. No, I'm not in the right place. 24. And under my thigh. So there's a comment here. Oh, shoot. Damn, it's very hard to get around this thing. There we go. So Robert Alter says, holding the genitals or placing a hand next to the genitals during the act of solemn oath taking is attested in several ancient societies, a fact already noted by Avraham ibn Ezra in the 12th century. Though here it may have had the special purpose of invoking the place of procreation, as the servant is to seek a bride for the only son of Isaac. So he does seem to imply. So this footnote, no, these footnotes work horribly here. Online Nook is just horrible. At any rate, so he seems to imply here that this is a euphemism for placing on the private parts, right? So without getting too colloquial, you could. I've heard you could say, as I swear by my balls or something like that. The private parts are a very sacred part. So if you're swearing, while your hand is on the private parts, then it's a very solemn kind of, it's like I swear by my mother, right? So I swear by my fill in the blank, my private parts, that's such and such and such, right? And again, notice that there were really none of these modern inhibitions, Western inhibitions of doing such a thing, of in that case, what's his name? Eliezer placing his hand on the private parts of Abraham, or in this case, Yosef placing his hand on the private parts of Yaakov. There was a lot less. There was none of this, Western sexual squeamishness or hold on, the cat's jumped up on. Navid, you want to participate in the Torah study? Huh? What do you have to say about Genesis chapter 47? Huh? Go down. So, there was none of this kind of sexual squeamishness or sexual inhibition that is so common in Western society today. And we go to other cultures, and I've been to many different countries, and you'll see that if you go to other countries, there's a lot less, especially outside of Western countries, a lot less inhibition and stigma about doing things like this. I don't know. Americans seem to have a hang up about this kind of stuff. I mean, Westerners in general, but it's not so much Westerners, but Americans have this huge hang up about this kind of stuff. But we see that there's not such a hang up about this kind of stuff in the Torah. Okay, so let's get back to, we were in Genesis 47. Simna yadcha tachat yirechi, v'asita imadi chesed, do kindness for me, emet, do kindness and truth. This again is a phrase that's found a lot, chesed wa emet. And if I had more time, I'd try to analyze. Well, this would kind of be more like a paper that someone would submit in university to analyze the formulaic structure of this sentence, right? Does it occur a lot where it says im natzati chayin b'einecha, starting with that phrase, and then the placement of the hand on the private parts, and then the use of the phrase hased v'emet. Okay, I'm not going to go through that now, but if someone wants to write a paper, then that would be a good topic. Do we find these phrases coming together, or this sequence of events and sequence of phrases coming together in different places in the Tanakh or in other ancient Near East literature? Okay, tikbarenim b'mitzrayim. So what is al na tikbarenim b'mitzrayim? So what does Yaakov want? Ultimately, he does not want to be left in Egypt. He does not want to be buried in this heathen place of idol worship. Not that Canaan was any better, but at least it's going to be better someday, right? That's his land that he's been promised. So he does not want to be buried in Egypt. At the end, only in the same parsha at the end, right? We also see that Yosef is not buried in Egypt. Yosef is taken up to the land of Canaan. Verse 30, V'shachafti elim avotai, and I will rest, or I will sleep with my fathers. I'm sorry, that's an incorrect translation. V'shachafti im avotai, when I sleep with my fathers. V'nasatani mimitzrayim ukivartani bikfuratam, that pleased, or you shall take me, you shall carry me up, you shall carry me from Egypt and bury me in their burial place. Okay, so this is an interesting, just a grammatical lesson. V'shachaftim avotai. So literally it says and, or no, because the vav here is the vav hipuch, the conversive vav. So I will. It kind of says I will sleep, or I will sleep with my fathers. One second. I just want to analyze this 1 second. V'shachafti. Not to put in Mitzrayim. V'shachafti im avotai. Yeah, I will sleep with my fathers. But the implication here, the vav, or I'm sorry, the phrase "I will sleep with my fathers" is implying when I will sleep with my fathers. Again, we have the use of the future isn't always the direct future, but it can imply a lot of different, shall we say, moods. And in this case, it's saying when I sleep with my fathers, in Nisatani Mitzrayim, and then he gives a command to Yosef and Nisatani Mitzrayim, carry me out, lift me up out of Egypt, kivar tani, and bury me in their burial place. 1 second. And then Yosef says, "Anochi eseh kidvarecha." I will do as you say, as your words. Verse 31. V'yomer yishava li v'yishava lo v'yishtachu Yisrael al rosh hamitah. And then Israel makes Yosef swear that he will do this. So Israel does not want to be buried in Egypt. He wants to be buried in the land of Canaan, and he wants to be buried with his forefathers. Okay. Now we have the whole story of the blessing of Ephraim and Menashe. Lavi, what do you want, sweetheart? What, baby? Come. I know you're hungry. Volky's gonna feed you. Okay, come. Let me put you outside. Go. Okay, cat problem solved. So, ויהי אחרי הדברים האלה, ויאמר ליוסף, הנה אביך חולה. So, okay, so first he comes down and I guess he knows he's on his way out, Jacob, and he calls for Yosef and tells him, don't bury me here. And then actually he starts getting sick, meaning his, sickness that's going to lead to his death, like he's on his deathbed. And Yomer Yosef, hine avicha. So it was told to Yosef. Literally, he told to Yosef. Okay, but again, the subject here is implied, right? So it's like a shaliach. Yomer hashaliach liyosef. This is very common in the Torah, where the subject is left out and it's just implied, right? Yomer hamalach liyosef. The messenger said to Yosef. Yomer liyosef. So when the subject is left out, that's kind of an implied passive. It was said to Yosef, since the subject is not explicitly mentioned. At any rate, it was said to Yosef, your father's sick, so Yosef goes to visit Jacob with Menashe and Ephraim, Menashe being the firstborn and Ephraim being the secondborn. Again, we have the same structure here. We Yaged Yaakov. And it's literally, he said to Yaakov. Who said to Yaakov? Somebody said to Yaakov. They said, if we were translating to English, it would be like they said to Yaakov, or someone said to Yaakov. There's no subject here to the verb, so it's implied. It was said to Yaakov. It's kind of an implied passive tense using the active tense, but there's no subject. ויאמר הנה בנך יוסף בא אליך ויתחזק ישראל וישב על המיטה. Okay. It was said to Yaakov, Vayomer, and he said, literally, he said to Yaakov, or he told to Yaakov, and he said, your son Yosef is coming to you, etc., etc. And Israel strengthened himself, regained his strength, you could say, and sat up on the bed. Verse 3, Wayomer Yaakov el Yosef. And so this is what Yaakov has to say to Yosef. El Shaddai nira elai beluz. El Shaddai appeared to me in Luz. Luz is Bethel. We've spoken about Bethel extensively in recent studies. This is the place where Jacob had his dream, the Jacob's ladder dream, when he was first leaving his father's house as a young man. And it's also where he renews the covenant on his way back when he's coming back and ultimately settling in I believe, Beersheba, going back to his father's house. So So this is what he's referring to here. This was like the pivotal moment in his becoming a man. This is when he, this is let's say in modern day when a son goes to college, that's when they first become independent. This was Yaakov becoming independent. He was leaving his father's house for the first time ever, and he stops in Bethel, formerly called Luz. In fact, from the text, as we saw, it could be implied that that very night that he left his father's house, that first night, he stopped in Bethel in Luz, and he had this dream. And then the next day, he set up a standing stone and swore to God. We've spoken about it many times. I'm not going to go back over it again, but that's what he's referring to here. This pivotal moment in his life where he basically promised God that he would be God's servant, and that Yehovah would be his God, and that he would be Yehovah's servant. Right? This was a pivotal moment in his life, and Bethel is a pivotal place. I was speaking about this 2 days ago when I did a video about how Yerovam, the first king of the breakaway northern kingdom after Israel split into two kingdoms after the death of Solomon, set up golden calves in Dan and Bethel. Right, that's this very same place, Luz. This Bethel is often overlooked as as such an important place in the history of our people. It's really pivotal because this is where Yaakov basically this is where Israel is, in a sense, as a nation, born, because this is where Yaakov is on his way to Laban's house, where he'll meet Rachel and eventually have 4 wives and 12 children. So Bethel is in Yaakov's. We could say that Bethel is kind of the Jerusalem of Yaakov. In fact, I would claim, again, I know that archaeologists have basically said that this place, Bethel or Luz, I think they say it's equivalent to a place Bet-In. But I think there's maybe evidence that it's actually Jerusalem in the text of the Torah. But I don't know. If I were a professional archaeologist, then I would go I would go do some digging and check it out. Otherwise, maybe I can find an article of a professional archaeologist who believes the same hunch that I have. Let's look up at but Bethel is completely forgotten in a sense. We all remember Jerusalem. We all know Hebron and Marat HaMachpelah. We all know Shechem. Shechem is considered an important place. These are all considered important places, especially Jerusalem, of course. But Bethel is somehow forgotten, and Bethel is actually pivotal in the history of our people, especially with relation to Yaakov's life, to the life of Jacob. It's kind of ground zero for Jacob. And let's just do this. I want to learn a little bit more about not the modern day Bethel, which is a settlement, and I've been there, but this Bethel. So, let me make this a little bit bigger so it appears better on the screen. So Bethel, meaning house of God. Bethel is the name of a place often used in the Hebrew Bible. It is first mentioned in Genesis 12:8 as being there where Abraham pitched his tent. Later in Genesis, it is the location where Jacob dreamt of seeing angels and God, and which he therefore named Bethel, house of God. The name is further used for a border city located between the territory of the Israelite tribe of Benjamin and that of the tribe of Ephraim, which first belonged to the Benjaminites and later was conquered by the Ephraimites. Eusebius of Caesarea and Jerome both described Bethel in their time, these were church fathers, as a small village, blah, 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 doesn't matter. Most academics identify Bethel with the Arab West Bank village of Beitin, a minority preferring El Bire. Okay, so they don't know exactly where it is, but these are the main ones, Beitin or El Bire. Okay. 10 years after the 1967 Six-Day War, the biblical name was applied to the Israeli settlement of Bethel, constructed adjacent to Beitin. I've been to Bethel settlement many times. It's kind of the flagship settlement of the Dati Leumi movement. In several countries, particularly in the U.S., the name has been given to various locations. Yes, there's a Bethel in Long Island, not far away from where I grew up. So Edward Robinson identified the Arab village of Beitin in the West Bank with ancient Bethel in biblical researches in Palestine. He based this assessment on its fitting the location described in earlier texts and on philological similarities between the modern and ancient name, arguing that the replacement of the Hebrew El with the Arabic In was not unusual. David Palmer Livingston contradicts this view based on the lack of positive identification by means of inscriptions and relying on the distance from Jerusalem. According to Eusebius and Jerome, he identifies Bethel with El Bire. Suggesting, okay, I think we read this a couple weeks ago. It's okay, I want to do it again. Bethel is mentioned several times in Genesis. It is first mentioned in Genesis 12 and 13. As a place near where Abram stayed and built an altar on his way to Egypt and on his return. Let's look at that for a second. Let's see. You know, the easiest way to do it would be this. Genesis 12:8. Okay. Well, I don't think we have to look at the actual reference, but let's keep that up in case we want to. It's also said to be close to Ai, and just to the west of it. So Ai is the second city that was conquered by the Israelites when they entered the land of Israel, of Canaan, after Jacob. After Jericho. More famously, it is mentioned again in Genesis 28 when Jacob, fleeing from the wrath of his brother Esau, falls asleep on a stone and dreams of a ladder stretching between heaven and earth and thronged with angels. God stands on top of the ladder and promises Jacob the land of Canaan. Okay. Another account from Genesis 35 repeats the covenant with God and the name of the place as Bethel. This is when Yaakov is coming back and makes this the site of Jacob's own change of name to Israel. Both versions state that the original name of the place was Luz, a Canaanite name. This is when Yaakov is coming back into the land of Israel. And that's where he has the name change. Well, the name change actually occurs twice, right? If I remember correctly. First, he wrestles with the angel and that's in Peniel, or Penuel. And the angel tells him his new name is Yisrael, and then God kind of comes and confirms it right afterwards, and that takes place actually in Bethel. Let's look at that for 1 second. It's Genesis 35. I'll leave this open. I'll open a new window. Go to Genesis 35. I'm going to read it in the English just to make it go more quickly. So that's Dinah. So that's before. So there's an original name change. Jacob meets Esau. So it's before this. Jacob wrestles with the angel. So that night, okay, wait a second. So he wrestles with the angel. Where is he? He's in Penuel at this point, I believe. It's named the place Mahanaim. Night there, blah, blah, blah. His wives. They cross the Jabok, Yabok. Right, because he names the place Penuel, right? So it goes from Mahanaim to Penuel. For some reason, I always forget Mahanaim when I trace Jacob's travels back to link to his father. Okay, so then this angel says, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. That's in Genesis 32:28. So this is taking place in Penuel or Peniel. And this is the angel says, your name is Israel, Kisarita, Im Elohim, Wet Adam, V'yacholta, right? That's the phrase in Hebrew. So that's the first name change. And that's in Penuel. It's named Penuel, Pinei El, the face of God, because Jacob says he saw the face of God here. Jacob called the place Penuel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. But then the name change is reiterated. So now we have the whole thing where he meets Esau, and then ditches him, and then he ends up in Shechem. And we have the whole thing with Dinah. And then Jacob returns to Bethel. So let's read this. I'm just going to go in the English again to make it go a bit more quickly. Then God said to Jacob, go up to Bethel and settle there and build an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. So Jacob said to his household and to all with him, get rid of the foreign gods you have with you. Again, we had problems with foreign gods, with Lavan and Rachel. And purify yourselves and change your clothes, and come, let us go up to Bethel, where I will build an altar to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and who has been with me wherever I've gone. They gave Jacob all the foreign gods they had, etc. The oak in Shechem. Jacob and all the people with him, this is in Genesis 35, chapter 35, verse 6, came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. There he built an altar, and he called the place El Bethel, because it was there that God revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. Then Torah dies, Rebecca's nurse. So after Jacob, this is verse 9. After Jacob returned from Paddan Aram, God appeared to him and again and blessed him. God said to him, your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel. So he named him Israel. And God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and increase in number. A nation and a community of nations will come for you, and kings will be among your descendants. The land I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I also give to you, and I will give this land to your descendants after you. Then God went up from him at the place where he had talked with him. Jacob set up a stone pillar at the place where God had talked with him, and he poured out a drink offering over it. He also poured oil on it. Jacob called the place where God talked to him, had talked with him Bethel. So again, is reaffirming the name Bethel. So that would imply that this took place in Bethel. It would seem. Outside Bethel, yeah, they're in Bethel at this time, right? That's where Dvorah, Rebecca's nurse, dies. So again, God appears to him. So this is not referring to the wrestling of the angel in Peniel. This is now saying God appeared to him again, I guess in a vision, right? It's not through an angel this time. So this is like reiteration. God said to him, your name is Jacob, but you'll no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel. So he named him Israel. So this is maybe, I don't know, more before it was the physical angel that appeared to him saying it, but now God himself, in a sense, through a vision, I'm assuming, is reaffirming. So there are actually two places where it's affirmed that his new name is Israel. Not once, but twice. Once in Peniel, when he's wrestling with the angel, and once in Bethel, when he has his vision or when God speaks to him. And God said to him, so this is the same prophecy would seem, I am God Almighty, etc. And then Jacob set up a stone pillar and called it Bethel. It was already called Bethel, but we know that a lot of times names are reiterated multiple times, either for different reasons or for repetition of the same reason. So now he's calling it Bethel because God speaks to him again here. This is the same place where God had originally spoken to him in the vision. So the point I wanted to make here is that Bethel is the place where Jacob is renamed Israel, I guess officially you could say. Oh my God, my battery's about to die. Okay, well, I'm going to end this study now. Any rate, on this note, in a couple of minutes, and then we'll pick it up in the afternoon study. But I have another couple of minutes. So Bethel is the place where the name change from Jacob to Israel is reaffirmed by God himself, we could say. Okay. Okay. Repeats the covenant with God and the naming of the place. Okay. Another account from Genesis 35 repeats the covenant with God and the naming of the place as Bethel and makes this the site of Jacob's own change of name to Israel. Both versions state that the original name of the place was Luz. Right. So Bethel. So where does it mention Luz here? Yeah. In chapter 6. In the book of Joshua, Bethel is mentioned again in the book of Joshua 7:2-8-9 as being close to Ai. And on the west side of it, in this episode, Joshua sent men from Jericho to capture Ai. Again, Ai was the second city that was captured by the Israelites when they came into the land of Canaan. At 16:1, I guess Ai is again said to be near Luz, near Jericho, etc., etc. In the book of Judges 1:22, the descendants of Joseph capture the city of Bethel, which again is said to previously been called Luz. Descendants of Yosef captured the city of Bethel. Bethel was originally part of the Benjaminite territory, right? I believe. Let's see. Oops. Yeah, Israelite tribe of Benjamin, which first belonged to the Benjamites and was later conquered by the Ephraimites. So maybe I should plug in the battery and do just another. I would love to check out some of these references a bit more. And let me do that. Another 10 minutes of study. Okay. I'll be back in just a minute. I'm not going to put on music or anything. Well, music, I guess. No, I'm just going to run and get my plug, and I'll be right back. Hold that thought. Well, it's interesting. I just had a thought while I was getting the plug that even at Bethel, right? Again, I have a hunch which has no proof behind it, no archaeological proof. But if there are any fledgling archaeologists out there that would like to look into it, I have this hunch based on some of the text that's used with the story of Jacob's ladder that Bethel is actually the same as Jerusalem, or the Temple Mount specifically is where he had that dream. But as we saw, archaeologists identify biblical Bethel with either the Arab town of Beitin or there's another one, Bethel, or whatever it was. I don't remember. It's in the Wikipedia article. But I'm wondering if anyone ever identified or Bethel and Jerusalem. Let's just Google it. Jerusalem, the same. I wonder if there's any scholarly articles on something like that. Bethel. So we know that, I mentioned Yerovam set the golden calf up in Bethel. Blah, blah, blah. I'd have to go to Scholar. Let's go to Google Scholar for a second. Google Scholar. I'm on a wild goose chase here, but Bethel. Fate. Bethel. Bethel drew some rivalry. Interesting. Competition between Bethel and Jerusalem. It's not. That doesn't mean the city of Bethel. The later city of Bethel was the same place as the Bethel. At any rate, it is interesting that, okay, so let's look at one piece of interesting evidence, which is the fact that we know that even according to archaeologists and according to the place where the city was later on, right, that it's near Jerusalem. So wherever Jacob had this vision, even if Bethel isn't exactly Jerusalem, it's near Jerusalem, right? He could have had the vision anywhere, right? And it just happened to be quite close to Jerusalem out of all of the places, even though Jerusalem was, had long before it was chosen, it was just a Canaanite city at that point, right? If it even existed at that point, it was Salem. So what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that even if Bethel is not the same as Jerusalem, and again, I've mentioned a number of studies that is strange evidence with the when Jacob has his dream that maybe Bethel is Jerusalem, because he says things like this is the house of God. It's named Bethel. This is the house of God. That's where the house of God ended up being in Jerusalem. And he says this is none other than the Sha'ar Shemayim. This is none other than the gate to heaven, right? So it seems to be this special place where heaven and earth connect, which is basically what the Beit HaMikdash, the house of God, Bethel, that's much later built, is basically what it is, because God lives, quote unquote, lives between the Keruvim, between the Cheruvim on the ark cover, which is ultimately ends up in the house of God in Jerusalem, and that is kind of considered, where God, quote unquote, lives on earth between the Cheruvim, and where his, that's kind of can be considered the gate between heaven and earth. So there's just a lot of evidence linking this place Bethel to the place that was later chosen for the Beit HaMikdash to be built. And even though maybe there's no evidence for it, archaeological evidence, then definitely seems to be some textual evidence, at least referring not to the city maybe of Bethel, but this place that Jacob named Bethel when he had the dream. And yeah, so I'm just curious if there's any evidence besides my hunch that Bethel and Jerusalem are the same. At any rate, we'll go on just a little while longer, maybe another 5 or 10 minutes, and look at more of the references of Bethel. So so we have in the book of Judges, where was it? 122, the descendants of Joseph captured the city of Bethel. Judges 4:5, the prophetess Devorah said to dwell at Bethel under the palm tree of Devorah. Presumably a reference to Genesis 35:8, right? Because Devorah was the nurse of, we just saw that, the nurse of Rivka, and is buried under a tree near Bethel. So that's interesting. Let's take a look at that, Judges 4:5. And then maybe I'll end the study for the morning. So I need to take a break. So Judges 4:5, I'll just read it in the English to make it go quickly. And if we need to refer to the Hebrew or anything, we will. Again, the Israelites, let's pick it up in verse 1, did evil in the eyes of Yehovah. Now that Ehud was dead, so Yehovah sold them into the hands of Yavin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hatzor. Hatzor is up in the north, a famous archaeological site, perhaps just about one of the most famous in all of Israel. Sisera, the commander of his army, was based in Hareshot Goyim, because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. They cried to Yehovah for help. Now Devorah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidot, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Devorah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. Let's look at that in the Hebrew. Hello. Devorah Isha Nevi'ah. So Devorah, a Isha Nevi'ah, a prophetess, a woman prophetess. Ish Lapidot, the wife of Lapidot, he Shufta et Israel ba'etahi. She judged Israel. She was the leader over Israel. Those were called the judges in those days. The judge was the leader, and almost always a prophet, like Shmuel, like Samuel. He Yoshevet tachat Tomer Dvorah. She would sit under the date tree of Dvorah, Ben Harama uben Bethel, Behar Ephraim. She would sit under the date tree of Dvorah between Ramah and Bethel. Behar Ephraim. So here Bethel is mentioned. Behar Ephraim, in the hills, in the hill country of Ephraim, or in the hills of Ephraim. Yalu Eleha Bnei Israel lemishpat, and the children of Israel went up to her for judgment. So what do we see here? Right. So we see it's called the date tree of Dvorah, which is between Ramah and Bethel. So it's near Bethel. And then we see here in, where was it? Where Rivka's nurse dies. It's going to be Genesis 35. Right here, 35:8. So let's look at that for a second. Genesis 35:8. Watamat Dvorah meneket Rivka. So Dvorah's wet nurse, I guess you could call it. Meneket linok means to suckle. So her wet nurse, her nurse from her youth, I guess you could call it, died. Her name was Dvorah. ותקבר מתחת לבית אל, תחת האלון. So she was buried מתחת לבית אל, underneath Bethel, but maybe it means like down in the valley below Bethel. תחת האלון, יקרא שמו אלון בחוץ. So underneath the alon, so alon is understood as an oak tree. I have a good friend whose last name is Alon. It's just called oak. So Vikra Shemo Alon B'chut, and its name is called the oak tree of crying. So here it's an Alon, and here where Dvorah sat, she sat under a Tomer, which is related to the word Tamar, date. Tamar, by the way, you can find even in modern, well, it's not really English, but if you've ever heard of the fruit tamarind, which is commonly used in Indian and Persian cooking. So the tamarind, it's not related to the date, but it's kind of a slightly bitter, or shall we say sour fruit that comes from a tree out in Persia / India, in that area, and it's called tamarind. If you ever went to an Indian restaurant, that you may have gotten a little bit of tamarind sauce or had tamarind added to your curry. And tamarind actually just means tamar hindi, or Indian tamar, Indian date, because the fruit looks somewhat like a date, even though it's not related taxonomically to the date. It looks somewhat like a date, and but it doesn't taste like a date. So tamarind is tamar hindi. So that's the same word again. So Tomer Dvorah means the date tree of Dvorah. So now she's sitting under date tree of Dvorah, but here where Dvorah, the nurse of Rivka, dies, it's an alon, it's an oak tree. So it's not the same tree, even though this is many hundreds of years later, we wouldn't think it would be. But I guess it's maybe a reference, right? Her name is Dvorah. She's sitting under, there's a tree that's mentioned, right? So Dvorah, the nurse of Rivka, is buried under an oak tree called Alon Bachut, the oak tree of crying. And here, Dvorah, the judgeess, the prophetess / judgeess, is sitting under a date tree called the date tree of Dvorah, Tomer Dvorah. Okay, interesting. We'll go on just another minute. Under the palm tree, presumably a reference 35:8, where another Dvorah, the name of nurse of Jacob's mother Rebecca, is said to have been buried under a tree at Bethel. Right? Bethel is said, so there's no implication there that it's the same tree. Maybe it's exactly the same spot or right near the same spot where Devorah the nurse was buried, or maybe it's just a reference. Maybe it's in the general area, and Devorah was named after that original nurse, and so she, said, "Oh, my name is Devorah. I should, when I sit under a tree, I'll go sit under a tree out of honor, to honor the person that I'm named after, the judge, the nurse of Rivka." Any rate, Bethel is said in Judges 4:5. We just saw that to be in Mount Ephraim. Right. At Judges 20:18, where the Hebrew Bethel is translated, blah, 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 as the house of God, the people of Israel go to Bethel to ask counsel of God when they are planning to attack the Benjaminites in the battle of Giv'ah. That's the end of the book of Judges, where the Benjaminites are attacked for allowing a concubine to be raped and murdered, in a kind of replay of the Sodom and Gomorrah, or kind of a hearkening to the whole Sodom and Gomorrah story. All right. Anyway, there's a lot of references to Bethel, as we can see. And I'm not going to go through all of them now. Maybe I will this afternoon if I'm in the mood. But Bethel is very overlooked. It's a very important place in the history of our people, of the Tanakh. It's the formative place for Jacob, where he basically leaves his father's house and turns from a child or a young man in his father's house to his own independent individual, eventually leading to the 12 tribes of Israel. And it's a cultic place, right? Both when he leaves Israel, and when he leaves Canaan, and when he comes back to the land of Canaan. It's later a cultic place, made a cultic place by Jeroboam. I'm sure they'll mention that later on. Here it is. After the kingdom of Israel split into two kingdoms on the death of King Solomon, Jeroboam, the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel, made two golden calves. One Kings 12:28, and set one up in Bethel and the other in Dan in the far north of his kingdom. So apparently to make it unnecessary for the people of Israel to have to go to Jerusalem to worship in the temple there. It seems that this action provoked the hostility of Judeans. Okay. Etc. So Bethel is an underlooked place. We always think of Jerusalem, we think of Hebron, we think of Shechem, we think of these as the holier, the formative places, maybe even Beersheba, right? Because we know the story of the wells with Abraham and again with Yitzhak. But Bethel is often overlooked. But wherever it is, the point I want to make is an extremely important place in the history of our people. It's a kind of a cultic center, was a cultic center, is near Jerusalem, even if it's not the same as Jerusalem. It was near Jerusalem, and it has great importance and is often overlooked, Bethel. So with that, I think I'm going to end this morning's study. אומרים שזה משקף את בבל בעצם בגלל המקדשים שהיו שם, וזה לפי המחקר החילוני. What's לפי I don't know if this person is still here, but what is מה לפי המחקר החילוני? What are you talking about? If you're still here, you can comment again. You're talking about the placement of Bethel as being identified with Bet-In. I don't know if this person is still here. Okay, at any rate, I think I'm going to end. Shnia. Okay. I can wait a second. Okay, a Shnia has passed. I'll wait another 30 seconds and then I got to go. אני מחפש את המקור, okay? He's looking for the source. We can wait a minute. Well, I'll go on and read more about Bethel in the meantime, and then I'll check his posts. So we want to go back to this. So maybe we can even check some of these references. No, I'll read through here. In the book of Judges 1:22, the descendants of Yosef captured the city of Bethel. Okay, we read that already. At the next month of the ark, at the next mention of the ark, first in 1 Samuel 4:3, it's said to be kept at Shiloh. We know that. Shiloh was the place where the ark was basically before it came to Jerusalem. In the book 1 Samuel 7:16, it is said that the prophet Samuel, who resided at Ramah, which is right near Bethel, we just saw that, right? That Devorah, prophetess, resided between Ramah and Bethel. We just read that. Used to make a yearly circuit of Bethel, Gilgal, and Mitzpah to judge Israel. At 1 Samuel 10:3, Samuel tells Shaul to go to Bethel to visit the hill of God, where he will meet a group of prophets coming down from the high place, a psaltery and a terebinth and a pipe and a harp. It appears that there was a Philistine garrison there at the time. Bethel is mentioned again in 1 Samuel 13:2 and 2 Samuel 30:27. Okay. Then we have the story of Jeroboam. Okay, hold on a second. Let's see what he wrote. יאיר זקוביץ ואביגדור שנען מציגים את סיפור ראשיתו של המקום פורסם בבית אל כהפוך הסיפור המקראי על ראשיתה של בבל. I'm not sure exactly what that's meaning, trying to say. מציגים את סיפור ראשיתו של מקום הפולחן בבית אל כהפוך סיפור המקראי על ראשיתה של בבל? I don't understand what you're trying to say. סולם יעקב כסיפור חילופי למסורת הבבלית שהייתה רווחת גם בעת ישראל בדבר בניין מגדל בבל המעביר את שאר האל משמעות השם בבל לארץ ישראל מרכז האמונה באל אחד. So if I understand what you're trying to say, okay, let me read this one more time here. מציגים את סיפור ראשיתו של מקום הפולחן בבית אל כהפוך הסיפור המקראי על ראשיתה של בבל. Okay, I understand now. So he's trying to say that this, whatever source this is, it's somehow that Bethel is the Israelite equivalent to the Oya Chilonit. Okay, somehow that Bethel is somehow equivalent to the Tower of Babel, because Babel, Shar Ha'el, Hamavir et Shar Ha'el, Babel, we know that in Arabic and in Aramaic, Bab is Sha'ar, is gate, so Babel means gate of God. So Bethel is called Shara Shamayim, the gate of heaven. And so therefore, somehow Bethel is the Israelite equivalent of the Tower of Babel. And these people say that the entire Bethel story is just basically a made-up story, just the Israelite version of the Tower of Babel story or something along those lines. Okay, whatever. On that unhappy note, we'll end this morning's study. We're going to pick it up again in, about 2.5 hours. And if you look at the original announcement, then you can find the links to this afternoon study. And that's about it. I'm going to end this morning study. I think it was a good study. We focused again on Bethel a lot. This place of great importance in the history of our people that's often overlooked and shouldn't be. It should have a central place. Even Shiloh is considered more important or more well-known in a sense than Bethel. Bethel is a central place in our people's history. Okay, with that, I'm going to end the broadcast, and I will see everyone for the afternoon study. Shabbat Shalom.